Society has taught you a lie and called it virtue, that being harmless makes you good, that suppressing your strength makes you safe, that the absence of threat is the same as reliability. It is not. A man who cannot cause harm is not trustworthy. He is merely incapable. Safety built on weakness is fragile, and fragility always collapses under pressure. The dangerous part inside you is not a flaw. It is not something to be erased, medicated, or apologized for. It is energy, it is force, and energy never disappears. When it is denied structure, it leaks into destruction. When it is buried, it rots and explodes later. The problem has never been strength. The problem has always been strength without command. You do not lack morals. You do not lack motivation. You lack a system that can control power voluntarily. Uncontrolled strength destroys. Suppressed strength decays. Only disciplined strength becomes reliable. There is no middle ground. Not choosing is still a choice, and it always ends the same way. This book is built on a single law that does not bend. The dangerous part of you does not get to decide. It only gets to execute. Rules command. Objectives lead. Strength follows. When this hierarchy is clear, power stops being a liability and becomes an asset. Reliability is not kindness. It is capacity under control. It is the ability to act decisively and the discipline to stand down when responsibility does not require action. No performance, no proving, just consistent behavior under pressure. This is not for those who want to be nicer. This is for those willing to place their strength under command for life. If you are not willing to do that, stop here. If you are, continue. Chapter 1. The Morality of the Weak. Harmless is not good. It never was. It never will be. A harmless person does not create safety. A harmless person simply lacks the ability to cause damage. That absence is not virtue. It is incapacity. Society has confused weakness with goodness for so long that most people no longer question it. They see someone who cannot hurt anyone and call them moral. They see someone who avoids conflict and label them safe. That assumption is false, and it is dangerous. Safety does not come from the absence of power. Safety comes from power that is restrained by choice. A person who cannot cause harm is not trustworthy. They are merely limited. The world is not a gentle place. It never has been. Evil does not disappear because you refuse to imagine it. Threats do not dissolve because you wish them away. Violence, manipulation, betrayal, and destruction exist whether you acknowledge them or not. When danger appears, it is not stopped by good intentions. It is stopped by capacity, the ability to act, the ability to respond, the ability to impose force if necessary. When someone lacks that ability, they are not safe, they are exposed, and when pressure arrives, exposure leads to collapse. Modern morality teaches people to shrink, to soften, to become agreeable. It tells them that being harmless makes them good. What it really does is teach fear, fear of confrontation, fear of strength, fear of their own capacity to cause damage. That fear is not control, it is paralysis. And paralysis under pressure produces unpredictable outcomes. People who define themselves as harmless do not become noble when threatened. They become desperate. They lie. They betray. They submit. Or they explode. Fear does not make people moral. Fear makes people unreliable. A person who has never imagined what they are capable of will be defeated by someone who has. This is not philosophy. This is reality. The individual who cannot conceive of cruelty cannot recognize it early. They do not see danger until it is already too close. They do not know how to respond because they have spent their entire life rehearsing avoidance. When confronted with real threat, they freeze or panic. That is not goodness. That is incompetence. Safety has never belonged to the weak. It belongs to those who can defend boundaries, those who can apply force and choose not to unless required. The control of danger does not come from intention. It comes from capacity plus restraint. A system where safety depends on everyone being nice collapses the moment someone is not. And there will always be someone who is not. The illusion of harmless morality transfers power away from those who could actually protect order. It places moral authority in weakness and calls it virtue. This inversion is fatal. The moment a harmless person faces real pressure, their values evaporate. They comply to survive. They compromise to escape pain. They abandon principles the moment consequences appear. That is why morality based on fear is not morality at all. It is a performance maintained only when conditions are comfortable. True safety exists only when dangerous individuals place themselves under voluntary control, not because they are afraid, but because they decide to. Control is not suppression. Control is not denial. Control is the ability to delay action. Redirect energy and choose the correct response under pressure. Weak people do not control themselves. They avoid situations where control would be tested. That avoidance is not discipline. It is concealment. Aggressive energy does not disappear when denied. It accumulates. What is suppressed does not stay silent. It builds pressure. Over time, denial becomes instability. The person who refuses to acknowledge their capacity for harm does not neutralize it. They store it, and stored aggression eventually leaks out in distorted ways. Passive aggression, sabotage, sudden outbursts, quiet cruelty. The longer the denial, the more destructive the release. This is not a theory. It is a pattern repeated across individuals, relationships, and societies. There is no neutral state. Energy moves or it decays. Strength unused does not remain harmless. It turns inward or sideways. When people refuse to recognize their dangerous side, that side gains autonomy. It begins to act without permission. At that point, the person is no longer in control. They are being driven. What they call morality is simply the absence of opportunity. Give them pressure, and the truth surfaces. The standard must change. Harmlessness cannot be the measure. The measure must be capacity plus control. The ability to cause harm paired with the discipline to choose restraint. That is the only configuration that produces reliability. A person who can act and chooses not to is predictable. A person who cannot act has no choice at all. They are at the mercy of circumstance. This is where the shift begins. Not with skills, not with techniques, with recognition. The recognition that the old moral standard is flawed. The recognition that weakness dressed up as goodness is still weakness. And weakness under pressure becomes dangerous. The refusal to acknowledge this truth is not innocence. It is negligence. Control is not repression. Repression is fear-based avoidance. Control is deliberate delay. It is the space between impulse and action. It is the capacity to feel aggression without being commanded by it. That capacity only exists after strength is acknowledged. You cannot control what you pretend does not exist. You cannot command what you refuse to see. Acknowledging the ability to cause harm is not an endorsement of violence. It is a prerequisite for discipline. Until a person admits their capacity, there is nothing to restrain. There is only fragility. The next chapters will build structure. They will define control. They will install systems. None of that works unless this foundation is set. Without this admission, every structure collapses. The choice is binary. There is no middle ground. Either you are capable of causing harm and choose control, or you are harmless because you are afraid. The first produces order. The second produces instability. One is reliable, the other is not. Morality built on fear cannot be trusted. It breaks the moment it is tested. This chapter does not ask for comfort. It does not offer reassurance. It does not teach you how to feel good about yourself. It removes an illusion. If that illusion dies, something stronger can take its place. If it remains, everything built on top of it will fail. The harmless standard ends here. The next chapter begins where energy is no longer denied, where movement replaces stagnation, where strength is no longer hidden, but directed. The old identity cannot follow. It must be left behind. Chapter 2. Energy never stands still. Most people believe there is a neutral zone, a place where they can leave things unfinished, untouched, undecided, a place where nothing good happens, but nothing bad happens either. That belief is a lie. There is no neutral ground. Energy does not pause. It does not wait. It does not sit quietly until you feel ready. Energy is always moving, and if you are not controlling it, it is already controlling you. This chapter exists to destroy the illusion of later. To make one thing unmistakably clear, no control means being controlled. Every moment you hesitate, every time you delay, every time you tell yourself you will deal with it later, you are not standing still. You are sliding backward. Tri Huan is not rest. Tri Huan is drift. And drift always has a direction. Aggression, drive, intensity, impulse, these are not moral flaws. They are natural forces, raw energy. They exist whether you acknowledge them or not. The mistake most people make is believing that ignoring energy is the same as managing it. It is not. Ignored energy does not disappear. It looks for an outlet, and if you do not decide where it goes, it will decide for you when energy appears. A window opens, a brief moment where command is possible. Miss that window, and command is transferred, not to logic, not to principle, but to reflex, to impulse, to whatever pattern has the least resistance. This is how people slowly lose control without ever making a clear decision to do so. The first thing you must understand is this: the moment energy appears. The question is not whether you will act. The question is, who is acting? You or the impulse? If you do nothing, the answer is already chosen. Inaction is not neutrality. Inaction is surrender. This is the thief most people never see. Identity erosion does not begin with collapse. It begins with small, repeated moments where energy takes the wheel because command was absent. One skipped decision, one delayed response, one "I'll handle it later," over time. These moments accumulate, not into chaos, into drift, quiet, invisible drift. When energy is not placed under control, it selects its own target. That target is never long-term, never responsible, never aligned with who you say you want to become. Energy without command serves immediacy, relief, release, short-term discharge. That is its nature. Expecting otherwise is fantasy. Control does not mean suppression. Control means delay, a forced gap between the appearance of energy and the execution of action. That gap is where command lives. Without it, there is no leadership, only reaction. The first requirement is simple but non-negotiable when energy appears. You must notice it, not judge it, not justify it. Notice it. The appearance of energy is a signal, a moment of risk, a moment where authority can either be claimed or lost. Acting immediately is a mistake. Ignoring it is worse. You do not act, you hold. This pause is not weakness. It is dominance. It is the refusal to let raw force dictate direction. Most people cannot tolerate this moment, the tension, the pressure, the urge to release. That is why they lose control. They mistake discomfort for danger. They choose discharge over command. Scarcity is the second reality most people refuse to face. There is no standing still. Every moment you delay control. Authority shifts. You do not get unlimited chances to decide later. Later is not a storage unit. Later is a leak. Energy that is not directed now will leak into behavior you did not consciously choose. Not choosing is a choice. Always. Every time you hesitate, you hand command to the fastest, loudest impulse available. Over time, this becomes pattern. Pattern becomes habit. Habit becomes identity. This is not philosophy. This is mechanics. The idea that you can wait until you feel clearer is another illusion. Clarity does not come before control. Control creates clarity. Waiting for the perfect moment to decide is how you guarantee that decision will not be yours. This is why the right to say later must be removed, not negotiated. Removed. The moment energy appears, a decision must exist, not necessarily an action, a decision. Will this energy be placed under control or not? If the answer is unclear, the outcome is already determined. To understand this fully, you must look at outcomes, not intentions. There are only two observable chains. One leads from lack of control to impulsive action to instability. The other leads from control to delay to behavioral stability. There is no third path, no hybrid, no safe middle. People love to explain their impulses. Stress, circumstances, fatigue. None of that matters. Explanations do not stabilize behavior. Control does. If an action does not produce stability over time, it is misaligned. No story can change that. This is where most self-deception lives. People judge behavior by intention instead of result. They defend actions that feel justified but produce chaos. Control requires a different metric. Observable consequence. Does this behavior create consistency or erosion? That is the only question that matters. Anything that does not place energy under command must be eliminated, not adjusted, not softened. Eliminated. This is the ruthless filter. Binary, clean. There is no room for negotiation when energy is high. Negotiation only exists to give impulse more time to win. The test is simple. Does this behavior require control? If yes, it stays. If not, it goes. This is not about morality, it is about command. Anything that bypasses command undermines authority. Over time, authority that is repeatedly undermined ceases to exist. Many people believe freedom comes from flexibility. They are wrong. Freedom comes from structure. Structure reduces the number of decisions required when energy is strongest. It removes debate. It replaces choice with rule. This is how stability is built. Stability does not come from motivation. Motivation fluctuates. Stability comes from decisions made before intensity appears. Rules established in calm conditions. Boundaries defined in advance. When energy arrives, the system executes. There is no reassessment, no emotional vote. This is how behavioral consistency is formed. You decide once, you obey many times. You do not renegotiate with yourself in moments of pressure. That conversation only exists to delay control and invite drift. The repetition of controlled response in low-intensity conditions is critical. This is where most people fail. They only attempt control when stakes are high. By then, it is too late. Control must be rehearsed when pressure is low so that it holds when pressure spikes. Over time, this creates something rare. Reliability. Not because you feel disciplined, but because your system does not depend on feeling. Energy still appears. Aggression still exists. Drive still surges. But it no longer decides. It executes under command. This is the integration most people never achieve. They either suppress energy and become weak, or they unleash it and become unstable. The middle path is command. Dangerous energy, voluntarily controlled, power that does not leak. The chapter ends where it began. There is no neutral ground. There is no later. There is no safe delay. If you are not controlling your energy, it is already controlling you. Trihuan is not passive. It is a slope, and slopes always lead somewhere. This chapter does not exist to inspire you. It exists to close an escape route, to remove an illusion, to lock a mechanical truth into place. Energy never stands still. Control is not optional, and authority, once surrendered, is not easily reclaimed. Chapter 3. The 3 States of Power. There is a lie almost everyone lives inside without realizing it. The lie of neutrality. The belief that power can be left alone. That aggression can be parked somewhere inside and dealt with later. That if you do nothing, nothing happens. This is the illusion that ruins lives quietly. Power does not wait. Power does not stand still. Aggressive energy does not sit in a neutral position. It is either commanded or it commands. There is no middle ground. There is no safe pause. The moment you believe you have not chosen yet, you already have. And you chose wrong. Power that is not placed under control does not disappear. It looks for an exit. It finds one, always. You must understand this before anything else. Energy moves. If it is not directed, it directs itself. If it is not disciplined, it creates its own rules. If it is not placed under authority, it takes authority. There is no neutral state where strength waits patiently for your readiness. That idea is comfort talking. And comfort lies. Every human being with power inside them is already living in one of 3 states: uncontrolled, suppressed, or disciplined. There is no 4th option. There is no observer seat. You are in one of them right now, whether you admit it or not. The first state is uncontrolled power. This is strength without command, aggression without delay. Emotion gives the order and the body executes immediately. There is no pause, no filter, no structure. The impulse appears and action follows. This state feels alive at first. It feels honest. It feels real. But it is chaos wearing the mask of authenticity. In this state, anger decides, desire decides, pride decides. The person does not act, they react. Every trigger pulls the trigger. Every spark becomes a fire. There is no space between feeling and doing. And because there is no space, there is no control. The mechanism is simple and brutal. Aggression turns into outburst. Outburst turns into damage. Damage turns into isolation. People stop trusting. Structures collapse. Relationships erode. Opportunities disappear. And the person doubles down. Believing the problem is the world, not the lack of control. Uncontrolled power never creates order. It cannot. Order requires restraint. Order requires delay. Order requires obedience to something higher than emotion. Without that, strength only destroys. It may look dominant, it may look fearless, but it is weak because it cannot stop itself. A force that cannot stop is not powerful. It is dangerous to everyone, including the one carrying it. The second state is suppressed power. This is the state society praises, the state that looks safe. Aggression is felt but denied. Power is present but shamed. The person learns to be harmless, to swallow their instincts, to avoid conflict, to stay agreeable. They call it morality, they call it being good. But underneath, nothing is resolved. Energy is not removed. It is buried, and buried energy does not disappear. It rots, it twists, it leaks. Suppressed power does not explode immediately. It waits. It bends inward. It turns into passive aggression, into resentment, into quiet sabotage, into indirect destruction. The mechanism here is slower, but no less destructive. Aggression turns into repression. Repression turns into distortion. Distortion turns into sudden release. The explosion does not look like rage. It looks like betrayal, like manipulation, like self-destruction, like a collapse that surprises everyone because it was hidden so well. Suppressed power is not safe. It is unstable. It is a pressure chamber, and when it breaks without warning. People who suppress their strength are not peaceful. They are delayed disasters. They use morality to hide fear. They use politeness to avoid responsibility. They call it control, but it is avoidance. The world teaches you to choose between these two failures: be aggressive and destructive, or be harmless and small. Both are wrong. Both lead to loss of control. One loses control immediately, the other loses it later. Only one state produces stability. Only one state creates trust. Only one state allows power to exist without destroying everything around it. That state is disciplined power. Disciplined power does not remove strength. It preserves it. It does not kill aggression. It harnesses it. The energy remains intact. The danger remains real. The difference is command. In this state, power does not decide. It executes. It waits for permission. It moves only when the objective gives the order. Between impulse and action, there is delay. Between emotion and behavior, there is structure. Rules exist before feelings appear. Targets are defined before force is applied. Power is no longer personal. It is functional. The mechanism changes completely. Aggression becomes strength. Strength becomes protection. Protection creates reliability. A disciplined individual is dangerous, but predictable, capable of harm. but able to stop, able to act, but also able not to. This is the standard that creates order. This is the only state where others can rely on you, not because you are harmless, but because you are controlled. Discipline is not about being good. It is about being commanded. Power under discipline does not need to prove itself. It does not act to release tension. It does not act to impress. It acts only when necessary. And when it acts fully. This is where the illusion of neutrality finally collapses. If you do not place your power under discipline, it will fall into one of the other two states automatically. You do not drift into discipline. Discipline is a decision enforced daily. Delay is not neutral. Delay is decay. When you postpone control, patterns form. When patterns repeat, habits lock in. When habits lock in, authority shifts. Behavior starts commanding identity. At that point, you are no longer choosing. You are being carried. And being carried always ends in the same place: loss of command. This is the final truth of this chapter. You do not get to avoid the choice. You only get to delay facing it. And delay always favors chaos. Either your strength is under command or your life will be dragged by it. Either you decide where your power goes or it will decide for you. There is no moral escape, no philosophical hiding place, no neutral zone. You are already in one of the three states: uncontrolled, suppressed, or disciplined. This chapter does not teach you how to change yet. It does not rescue you. It does not soften the conclusion. It gives you a label and a verdict. Look at your behavior, not your intentions. Look at what you do when emotion rises. Look at whether you can stop. Look at whether you can delay. Look at whether rules exist before impulses appear. That is your state. Own it. Because from this point forward, pretending you have not chosen is no longer an option. Chapter 4. When emotions no longer give orders, delay before action. Most people think control means suppression. They believe being in control means pushing emotions down, locking them away, pretending they are not there. That belief is wrong, and it is dangerous. Suppression does not remove emotion, it only traps it. What you trap does not disappear. It accumulates. It builds pressure, and eventually, it explodes. Not when you choose, when you are weakest. Control is not about silencing emotion. Control is about stripping emotion of authority. Emotion can exist. Emotion can speak. But emotion does not decide. The moment you understand this distinction, everything changes. When people suppress emotion, emotion still drives behavior. It just does it from the shadows. The anger is still there. The fear is still there. The impulse is still there. The only difference is that it is no longer visible, no longer acknowledged, no longer managed. That is why suppressed people eventually snap. They think they are controlling themselves, but in reality, emotion is still holding the steering wheel. True control begins only when emotion loses the right to give orders, not when it disappears, when it is demoted. Control is not softness. Control is not weakness. Control is not hesitation. Control is a system. Control is delay plus redirection. Control is the ability to feel a surge and refuse to act on it immediately. Control is the discipline to create space between stimulus and response. That space is not optional. That space is the foundation of all reliable behavior. Without it, you are not choosing, you are reacting. and reaction is just emotion wearing a disguise. The most dangerous actions in a human life never come from slow thinking. They come from speed, from immediacy. From the moment where emotion spikes and action follows without friction, violence, destruction, self-sabotage, regret, they all share the same structure. No delay, no checkpoint, no command review. Control does not exist in speed. Control only exists where delay exists. If there is no delay, there is no control, only impulse pretending to be confidence. This is why delayed before action is non-negotiable. The delay is not there to calm you down. That is not its purpose. The delay is there to break the chain of command. Emotion demands action. Delay interrupts authority. Delay says, "You are not in charge." The moment you act immediately after an emotional spike, you have already surrendered control. It does not matter how justified the emotion feels. Justification does not equal command. Feeling something strongly does not grant it the right to decide your next move. Many people confuse delay with avoidance. They believe if they do not act immediately, they are being weak. They believe hesitation equals fear. This is another misunderstanding. Avoidance is inaction because of fear. Delay is inaction because of discipline. Avoidance has no plan. Delay has structure. Avoidance runs away from the situation. Delay stays present and refuses to move until the correct moment arrives. The difference is not subtle. One collapses under pressure, the other dominates it. A disciplined person does not act when emotion is at its peak. They wait, not because they are unsure, but because they are certain. Certain that emotion at its highest point cannot be trusted with decisions that carry consequences. When emotion is high, perception is narrow, judgment is distorted, long-term cost disappears. Only the urge remains. Acting at that moment is not strength, it is surrender. Real strength is holding position while the internal pressure screams for release. Energy does not disappear when you delay. That is another mistake people make. They think if they do not act, the energy will rot inside them. That only happens when there is no redirection. Energy is not the enemy. Misuse is. Aggressive energy is not meant to be erased. It is meant to be aimed. Emotion does not get to choose the target. The target is decided in advance, before emotion shows up, before the surge, before the test. This is where redirection becomes critical, when emotion rises. You do not ask what you feel like doing. That question hands control back to emotion. You already know the answer. The feeling wants release. It wants expression. It wants dominance. Instead, you execute the pre-installed directive. You move the energy into the action that was chosen before emotion entered the room. Training, work, structure, output. The feeling fuels the action. The action is not chosen by the feeling. Emotion is biological information. That is all. It signals pressure, threat, opportunity, friction. It is data. It is not command. Commands come from objectives and rules that exist before the moment. A disciplined system does not improvise under emotional load. It executes. Decisions made in advance protect you from decisions made in chaos. That is why important decisions are never made in emotional peaks. They are made in neutral states and enforced later without debate. If you allow emotion to decide, you will always justify the decision afterward. That is how people lose trust in themselves. They act. They regret. They explain. They repeat. Over time, identity erodes, reliability disappears. The person becomes unpredictable, even to themselves. Control restores reliability, not by killing emotion, but by chaining it to structure. This is the activation point of the command axis. The dangerous part of you does not get to choose direction. It exists to execute. It has power. It has force. It has intensity. But it does not have authority. Authority belongs to the objective. Authority belongs to the rules installed ahead of time. The dangerous part is a weapon. Weapons do not choose targets. They are aimed. From this point forward, every action must pass 3 gates: delay, rule, objective. If any gate is skipped, control is lost. Delay breaks emotional authority. Rules prevent improvisation. Objectives define direction. This sequence is not optional. It is the difference between power and chaos, between discipline and destruction, between someone who can be trusted and someone who cannot. When you master this, something shifts internally. You stop fearing your own intensity. You stop worrying about what you might do when emotions rise. You know the system will hold. You know there is a buffer. You know nothing irreversible happens in emotional heat. That confidence is not emotional. It is structural. It comes from knowing that no matter how strong the feeling, it does not get the final say. This is what real control looks like. Not silence, not calm, not pretending. Control is command hierarchy. Emotion reports. It does not decide. Action waits. It does not rush. Power is used. It is not wasted. From here on, emotion can surge as hard as it wants. It will not hijack your life. It has been stripped of authority. And once authority is gone, discipline becomes possible. Responsibility becomes stable. Structure becomes permanent. Chapter 5. Discipline is not about being good. Most people misunderstand discipline at a fundamental level. They think discipline is about becoming better behaved, calmer, nicer, more ethical. They believe discipline is a moral upgrade. It is not. Discipline has nothing to do with being good. Discipline is a control system. It exists for one purpose only: to remove decision-making from moments where you cannot be trusted to decide. If discipline were about intention, most people would already be disciplined. Their intentions are not the problem. Their behavior under pressure is. The gap between who they think they are and what they actually do appears the moment emotions spike. That is where discipline either exists or collapses. The first thing that must be done is a brutal audit. No excuses, no stories, no moral judgment, only facts. Look at the moments where behavior has repeatedly gone off course. Not when life was calm, not when everything was under control. Look at the moments of heat, fatigue, anger, desire, stress, loneliness, boredom. Those are the moments that reveal the truth. In every single one of those situations, the question is simple. Was there a rule in place before the emotion appeared, or was there not? This audit is not about shame. It is not about right or wrong. It is binary. Rule or no rule. Where there was no rule, command authority was lost. And when command authority is lost, behavior defaults to emotion, dolwa. People like to believe they lost control. That is not accurate. Control was never installed where no rule existed. Emotion did exactly what it is designed to do. It took over. It made the decision. It justified itself. It acted fast. That is not a moral failure. That is a structural failure. Every situation without a pre-existing rule is a point where authority is handed to emotion by default. Mark those points clearly. Those are not weak moments. Those are exposed systems, and exposed systems always get exploited. Once the audit is complete, the next step is non-negotiable. Emotional authority must be removed, not reduced, not balanced, removed. Discipline is not morality. Discipline is not feeling aligned. Discipline is not acting on what feels right. The moment emotion is allowed into the decision-making process. Discipline is already broken. Emotion is reactive. It is temporary. It is biased toward comfort. Release and immediate relief, that makes it completely unqualified to lead. Emotion does not disappear under discipline. It is not suppressed. It is demoted. The system is simple. There are two layers, the decision layer and the execution layer. The decision layer is cold, fixed, installed in advance. It contains only rules. The execution layer is where emotion lives. Emotion is allowed to provide energy, intensity, drive, aggression, but it is never allowed to choose direction. It either executes the rule or it is blocked. Nothing else. When people say they want to be in tune with their emotions, what they usually mean is they want permission to negotiate when things get uncomfortable. That permission is exactly what destroys consistency. The third step is the core of real discipline. Decisions must be installed before they are needed. Discipline is not the ability to decide well in hard moments. Discipline is the refusal to decide in hard moments at all. Every recurring situation requires a fixed response, not a guideline, not a principle, a decision, already made, already locked when the situation appears. There is no internal discussion. There is no evaluation of mood. There is no assessment of motivation. There is only one question. What is the rule? If the rule exists, behavior follows. If the rule does not exist, the system is exposed and must be repaired. This is why most people feel exhausted by self-control. They are trying to decide over and over again. Decision fatigue is not a lack of willpower. It is a lack of pre-installation. A properly disciplined system asks fewer questions, not more. It does not rely on strength in the moment. It relies on structure built in advance. The stronger the emotion, the more rigid the rule must be. Flexibility under heat is not maturity, it is instability. The fourth step is the removal of negotiation under heat. This is where most systems fail permanently. Negotiation feels intelligent, it feels reasonable, it feels adaptive. In reality, it is surrender disguised as logic. Negotiation during emotional intensity is the exact moment authority is handed back to emotion. Every exception teaches the system that rules are optional when pressure is high, and pressure is when rules matter most. There are no special cases under heat, no adjustments, no reinterpretations. Either the rule executes or the action is blocked. Anything else is a breach. People fear this rigidity because they believe it will make them robotic. That fear is unfounded. What actually happens is freedom. When negotiation is removed, internal conflict disappears. The mind stops arguing. Energy stops leaking. Action becomes clean. The system becomes predictable. Reliability is born here, not from motivation, not from belief, from consistency enforced without discussion. The final step is the activation of the command axis. This is the central operating truth that must remain intact from this point forward. Rules command. The dangerous part of you executes. That is the only acceptable hierarchy. Strength, aggression, ambition. and intensity are not removed. They are placed under command. They do not get to choose the target. They do not get to question timing. They do not get to rewrite orders. Their role is execution. Nothing more, nothing less. Every action that occurs must meet two conditions. The rule existed before the situation, and the rule was not modified after emotion appeared. If either condition fails, the action is blocked. This is not philosophy. It is mechanics. This is how stable behavior is created. This is how power becomes reliable. This is how someone becomes dangerous without becoming chaotic. By the end of this chapter, decisions no longer originate inside situations. They exist before them. Behavior no longer responds to emotion. It responds to structure. Emotion is no longer an authority. It is a resource. The command axis is locked. Rules lead. The dangerous part follows. This is not about being good. This is about being controlled. And controlled power is the only kind that can be trusted. Chapter 6. Who is in command? Every moment of your life is being commanded by something. There is no pause, no neutral mode, no empty space where nothing is in control. Every action you take, every word you speak, every decision you avoid is the result of a command. The only question is where that command comes from. There are only two options. Emotion is giving orders, or objective is giving orders. There is no third state. There is no balance between the two. One is always on top. Most people never make this distinction. They move through life reacting to pressure, reacting to frustration, reacting to fear, reacting to desire. They believe they are choosing, but they are not. They are responding. And response is not command. Response is obedience. When emotion is in charge, behavior follows whatever signal is loudest in the moment. Anger pulls the trigger. Fear hits the brakes. Pleasure steers the wheel. That is not freedom. That is automatic motion. When there is no clear command structure, aggressive energy drives itself, hungering for release, searching for expression. It does not wait for permission. It does not ask for alignment. It reacts. And reaction under pressure is how damage happens. Not because the person is evil, but because no one was in command. This chapter exists to end that confusion. To draw a hard line. Either you are commanded by emotion or you are commanded by objective. One leads to chaos. The other creates order. You do not drift into control. Control is claimed. Blame is the clearest signal that you are not in command. Blame is not just complaint. It is not just frustration. Blame is an act of delegation. The moment you say, "This happened because of them," you have handed authority away. You have declared that something outside you is now giving orders. Your behavior becomes a reaction to circumstances instead of a decision guided by objective. Blame feels justified. It often is justified. That is why it is dangerous. When you justify behavior through circumstances, you transfer command power. Reaction replaces decision. You move because something pushed you. You stop because something blocked you. You explode because something triggered you. In every case, the source of command is external, and whoever or whatever you blame now controls your next move. This is why blaming destroys sovereignty, not because it is morally wrong, but because it is operationally fatal. You cannot command what you have surrendered, as long as your actions are explained by what others did. You are not in control. You are being controlled. Unfairness does not grant exemption from responsibility. Not your fault does not mean not your responsibility. Cause and command are not the same thing. Something can cause pressure without earning the right to command your response. Confusing these two keeps people trapped in reaction cycles for decades. They replay the same behaviors, the same mistakes, the same explosions, all while insisting they had no choice. They did. They just never claimed it. Every situation collapses into one question: who gives the next order? Not who caused the problem, not who deserves blame, who commands the next action. If emotion gives the order, you react. If objective gives the order, you decide. That is the difference between a victim identity and a commander identity. Identity is not what you say you value. Identity is determined by what issues commands. A reactive identity follows feeling to action. A command identity routes action through objective. Intention does not matter. Character does not matter. Only the command source matters. If emotion decides, you are not in charge. If objective decides, you are. When the dangerous part of you decides its own targets, chaos follows. Strength without command is unreliable. Power without hierarchy destroys trust. This is why controlled individuals are rare, not because control is complicated, but because most people refuse to take command. They prefer reaction because reaction feels justified. Command feels lonely. Command removes excuses. The moment you claim command, blame collapses. You no longer need it. You do not deny reality. You do not pretend things are fair. You simply refuse to let unfairness issue orders. Responsibility is not punishment. Responsibility is authority reclaimed. The person who takes responsibility gains power. The person who avoids it stays reactive. This is not about being calm. This is not about suppressing emotion. Emotion does not disappear when you take command. It loses authority. It becomes information, fuel, pressure, not instruction. The dangerous part of you still exists. It is still strong. It is still capable. But it no longer chooses direction. It executes. The command structure must be explicit. Objective issues orders. The dangerous part carries them out. Emotion has no vote, no veto, no authority, if this hierarchy is not named. Reaction returns, if it is not enforced. Emotion will take over the first time pressure spikes. This is the identity shift. From victim to commander, the victim asks what happened to them. The commander decides what happens next. The victim explains behavior. The commander owns it. The victim reacts to pressure. The commander uses pressure. Reliable people are not those without emotion. They are those who do not let emotion command. They can feel anger without becoming violent, fear without freezing, desire without losing direction. That reliability comes from a clear chain of command, not from good intentions. This chapter does not teach comfort. It teaches authority. From this point forward, reaction is a choice you can no longer pretend you did not make. Every outburst, every retreat, every excuse is evidence of who is in command. If emotion is still giving orders, sovereignty has not been claimed. The declaration is simple. Objective commands. The dangerous part executes. Emotion does not decide. This is not a mindset. It is a structure. And structures either exist or they do not. When this structure is in place, behavior stabilizes, strength becomes predictable, power becomes trustworthy. Responsibility becomes natural, not because life becomes easier, but because command is no longer contested. From here on, you do not react. You issue orders. You do not explain. You execute. and you take responsibility for every command given. Chapter 7. Power without structure is destruction. Raw power without structure does not make you strong. It makes you dangerous to yourself. This chapter exists to end the fantasy that willpower can replace structure. It cannot. Willpower fades, conditions change, pressure rises, and when structure is missing, even the best intentions drift off course. Chaos is not sudden, it is gradual, it is predictable. And it always begins the same way: energy without structure. Aggressive energy never stands still. It moves, it pushes, it demands expression. When that energy is not locked into structure, it does not wait for permission. It does not respect your long-term plans. It follows the path of least resistance. This is not a moral problem. It is a mechanical one. Power needs rails. Without rails, speed becomes derailment. Most people believe they can compensate for weak structure with strong will. They are wrong. Willpower is conditional. It depends on sleep, mood, stress, momentum. Structure does not. Structure exists independently of how you feel. That is why structure wins long games and willpower loses them. If your system requires you to feel motivated, focused, or energized in order to function, it is already broken. The first step is prediction. Drift is not a surprise, it is guaranteed. If structure is missing, behavior will deviate over time, even if it starts clean, even if your intention is correct. Fatigue will arrive, boredom will arrive, distraction will arrive. This is not pessimism. This is reality. Planning as if these conditions will not appear is negligence. You must assume there will be days when focus is low and pressure is high. Any system that relies on trying harder in those moments is unstable by design. Willpower should never be used as a substitute for structure. The moment you do that, you introduce randomness into your behavior. Randomness is where control dies. This is why repetition under boring conditions matters. Stability is not built in moments of excitement. It is built in monotony. The ability to repeat the right behavior when nothing feels rewarding is the real filter. Anyone can perform when conditions are favorable. Only systems perform when they are not. If a behavior only exists when you feel inspired, it is not reliable. If it disappears the moment resistance appears, it is not structure, it is decoration. Structure is what runs when emotions fluctuate. Anything else is theater. The next step is detachment. Decisions must be separated from emotional states. Emotional intensity is the worst time to decide. It distorts judgment. It compresses time. It magnifies impulse. That is why decisions must exist before emotions rise. When intensity arrives, the system executes. There is no debate, no reassessment, no internal negotiation. This is not rigidity, it is protection. The purpose of structure is to remove choice at the wrong time. Choice under pressure is how mistakes are justified. Structure removes that risk. It replaces choice with rule. There are three structures that must exist at all times if power is to remain controlled. The first is boundary. Clear limits. What is allowed, what is forbidden. No gray zones, no exceptions when emotions run high. Boundaries are not suggestions, they are walls. If a boundary can be argued with, it is not a boundary. The second is repetition. Correct behavior must repeat under boring. Low reward conditions, this is non-negotiable. Repetition is what turns behavior into stability. Without repetition, Behavior remains conditional. Conditional behavior cannot be trusted. If you only act correctly when you feel like it, you are not in control. Your feelings are. The third is consequence. Every deviation must have a clear outcome, no avoidance, no justification, no delay. Consequences are not punishment. They are correction. They exist to close loops. When deviation carries no cost, it becomes a pattern. Patterns become habits. Habits become identity. All three structures must be present. Boundary without repetition collapses under boredom. Repetition without consequence decays into sloppiness. Consequence without boundary becomes arbitrary. Remove one, and the system fails. This is not theory. It is cause and effect. Power is only allowed to activate inside structure, if any structure is missing. Activation stops, no exceptions. This rule exists to prevent long-term damage. Power used without structure does not disappear when you are tired of it. It leaves residue. It creates momentum in the wrong direction. The failure chain is always the same. Remove boundaries, and energy spills over. Remove repetition, and correct behavior never stabilizes. Remove consequence, and deviation spreads. The damage is rarely immediate. That is why it is ignored. But it compounds, quietly, relentlessly. This is why constant structural checks matter. Are boundaries clear? Is behavior repeating under boredom? Are consequences enforced when deviation appears? If the answer to any of these is no, power is shut down. Not later, immediately. Structure is restored first. Only then does activation resume. This is how reliable people are built, not by feeling strong, not by wanting it badly, but by running systems that do not collapse under pressure. Reliability is not a personality trait. It is a structural outcome. Most people want to be powerful. Few want to be structured. That is why most power becomes destructive. It leaks into impulsive decisions. It escalates when unchecked. It turns inward when direction is lost. Structure prevents that. It channels force. It creates longevity. This chapter exists to draw a hard line. Power without structure is not freedom. It is instability. Willpower is not a backup plan. It is a liability when overused. Structure is not optional. It is the price of control. If you want to be dangerous without being destructive, structure is the requirement. Boundaries define the field. Repetition builds stability. Consequence enforces reality. Remove any one, and you invite drift. Drift does not announce itself. It erodes you quietly. There is no shortcut here, no inspirational workaround. Either structure exists or behavior decays. Either power is contained or it destroys. This is not a warning. It is a rule, and rules do not care how strongly you feel. Chapter 8. When behavior takes control. There is a moment most people refuse to believe exists, a line they assume they can always step back from, a point they think they can approach, touch, and still retreat safely. They tell themselves they will fix it later, that they are still in control, that they can always choose differently tomorrow. This belief is the most dangerous illusion of all, because there is a point where choice stops being available, a point where behavior no longer waits for permission, a point of no return. You need to understand this clearly, not emotionally, logically. There is a threshold after which behavior stops being a decision and becomes a reflex. Before that point, effort feels optional, control feels flexible. After that point, action happens before thought. Reaction replaces choice. The mind stops commanding and starts justifying. Most people do not fall apart suddenly. They slide, and the slide only feels harmless because it is gradual. The mechanism always begins the same way. Uncontrolled energy repeats. One action turns into a pattern. The pattern hardens. The behavior becomes familiar. Familiar becomes automatic. Automatic becomes identity. At no step does the system stop itself. At no step does it correct course on its own. Each repetition weakens command. Each repetition lowers the threshold. Each repetition trains the body to move without consulting the objective. This is how power changes hands. Quietly, legally, without drama. People underestimate accumulation. They believe damage must look dramatic to be real. They think destruction announces itself. It does not. It compounds. A single action seems harmless. A repeated action builds momentum. Momentum builds direction. Direction becomes destiny. The chain cannot be reversed by intention once it passes a certain point. Because intention does not run systems. Behavior does. This is where behavior starts driving the human instead of the other way around. The person still believes they are choosing. They still say, "I decided," but the sequence reveals the truth. Situation appears. Response fires. Explanation comes after. The rulebook is missing. The objective is bypassed. The body moves first. The mind follows, trying to sound reasonable, when reasons appear after actions. Command is already gone. This is the clearest signal that authority has shifted. Decisions feel fast, too fast, faster than thought, faster than reflection, faster than restraint. The person is no longer deciding what to do. They are deciding how to explain what they already did. At that point, willpower is irrelevant. Willpower only exists when there is space, when behavior runs on reflex. There is no space left to apply it. Many people try to solve this with effort. They believe they can overpower habit with motivation. They cannot. Motivation is unstable. Emotion is unreliable. Only structure holds behavior in place over time. Structure creates limits. Structure enforces repetition. Structure applies consequence. Remove structure and behavior becomes autonomous. Free, untethered, in control. This is why living on, "I'll decide in the moment," is not freedom. It is surrender. The moment you rely on impulse-time decisions, you have already lost authority, because impulse is faster than judgment. And speed wins every time. When there are no pre-installed rules, behavior does not wait, it acts, and once it acts enough times, it no longer asks. This is the core danger of delay. Delay is not neutral. Delay is a decision. Not locking behavior today is the same as handing control to behavior tomorrow. Every postponed boundary trains the system. That boundaries are optional. Every postponed rule teaches behavior. It can operate freely. Eventually, control does not weaken. It disappears. There is a moment when not yet becomes never. Not philosophically, mechanically. After enough repetition. The threshold for restraint is gone. At that stage, lack of control is no longer a choice. It is a sentence. The system is running itself. and the human inside it is just along for the ride. This chapter exists to remove your excuses, to make one thing clear. Time is not on your side. The longer you wait to impose structure, the more behavior learns to function without it. You do not get unlimited attempts. You do not get infinite resets. You get a window, and that window closes silently. This is not about morality. This is not about feeling bad or good. This is about authority. Who decides? The objective or the habit? The rule or the reflex? The structure or the impulse? Once behavior crosses the point of no return, the answer is no longer you. You are either still in command or you are already being driven. There is no outside position, no pause button, no observer role. If behavior repeats without rules, command is slipping. If explanations come after action, command is slipping. If you rely on later, command is slipping. This chapter does not offer comfort. It offers clarity. Structure is no longer optional. Delay is no longer safe. Control must be installed before it is lost, not after. Once behavior takes the wheel, taking it back costs far more than installing rules ever would have. You are not warned so you can feel urgency. You are warned because urgency already exists. Whether you acknowledge it or not, the point of no return is not announced. It is crossed quietly. And once crossed, everything becomes harder. There is nothing left to negotiate here. Either behavior stays under command or it will take command. Either structure is installed now or autonomy is surrendered later. The longer you hesitate, the less choice remains. This is where standing outside ends. This is where postponement ends. This is where the illusion of control collapses. From here forward, slow is not careful. Slow is dangerous. Slow is how authority is lost. Understand this clearly. Not later. Now. Chapter 9. Power only has value when it carries consequences. Power without burden is not power. It is noise. It is impulse. It is performance. Real power only exists when it is tied to consequence. If no one pays for the action has no weight. If the person who acts does not carry the cost, the act itself is hollow. This is where most people get power wrong. They measure it by intensity, by dominance, by how much damage can be done. That measurement is false. Damage without ownership is not strength. It is irresponsibility wearing the costume of confidence. Power becomes meaningful only when it is welded to responsibility. The moment you separate the two, power degenerates. It turns into violence, chaos, or theater. Someone who acts loudly but carries nothing afterward is not strong. Someone who intervenes but disappears when consequences arrive is not reliable. Reliability is the final test of power, and reliability is impossible without burden, before any action. There is one question that cannot be skipped. Who pays for this? Not who benefits, not who looks strong, not who feels justified, who carries the consequence when this is over. If the answer is unclear, action is forbidden. Power does not move until ownership is confirmed. This rule alone eliminates most unnecessary force in the world. It filters out ego. It filters out fear. It filters out the desire to be seen. The first misuse of power is power in service of the ego. This is the most common and the most seductive form. Power used to win arguments, to assert dominance, to prove superiority, to silence opposition, to extract recognition. This kind of power feels good in the moment because it feeds identity, but it avoids long-term cost. The damage is deferred, relationships erode, trust decays. Environments destabilize, and the person who acted walks away believing they won. They did not. They just postponed the bill. Ego-driven power is loud. It demands witnesses. It needs reaction. It looks for validation. It thrives on escalation. But it never stays to clean up the aftermath. That is the tell. If the goal is to be seen, action is disqualified. If the motivation is to feel superior, action is disqualified. If the outcome does not include carrying responsibility beyond the moment, power must not be activated. This is not restraint. This is discipline. The second misuse of power is suppression. This looks harmless on the surface, but it is not. Suppressed power is power denied its responsibility. It is strength locked away to avoid discomfort, to avoid conflict, to avoid the burden of stepping in when intervention is required. This is not control, it is avoidance, and avoidance always creates indirect damage. What is not confronted grows. What is not addressed spreads. What is not stopped early becomes unmanageable later. People who suppress their power often believe they are being moral. They are not. They are refusing the burden that comes with responsibility. There are moments where not acting is a failure of duty, moments where strength is required to stop drift, protect boundaries, or prevent collapse. Choosing comfort in those moments is not kindness, it is neglect. And neglect carries consequences whether you acknowledge them or not. The only valid form of power is power in service of responsibility. This power does not announce itself. It does not posture. It does not seek applause. It activates only when there is a clear obligation, a role to fulfill, a boundary to enforce, a structure to protect. Responsibility-based power is quiet, precise, and limited. It appears only when necessary and disappears immediately after the task is done. This kind of power has conditions. If there is no clear responsibility, power stays dormant. If the situation does not belong to you, you do not intervene. If the outcome cannot be carried by you personally, you do not act. Responsibility-based power does not borrow authority. It does not outsource consequences. It accepts them in advance. This leads to the rule of minimal intervention. Power is not meant to dominate a situation. It is meant to correct deviation. The goal is not to punish, not to humiliate, not to demonstrate strength. The goal is to stop the problem. Nothing more. The moment the deviation is neutralized, action stops. Continuing beyond that point turns correction into ego, and ego invalidates power. Before acting, the stopping point must be defined. Not after. Before. You must know exactly what outcome ends the intervention. One action. One boundary. One decisive move. When that outcome is reached, power disengages, no escalation, no continuation, no emotional release. Anything beyond the predefined stop is no longer responsibility. It is indulgence. Power used correctly is efficient. It wastes nothing. It does not linger. It does not leave residue. It solves the problem and withdraws. This is why reliable people appear calm under pressure. They are not restrained by fear. They are restrained by standards. They know exactly when to act and exactly when to stop. The final rule is the most important, the one that cannot be bent. The person who acts is the person who stands in front of the consequences. No exceptions, no delegation, no diffusion. If you are not willing to absorb every outcome of your action, you do not act. This rule instantly separates real power from fake power. Fake power looks for cover. Real power stands exposed. This is what makes someone trustworthy. Not their intensity, not their confidence, not their capacity for force, but their willingness to carry what follows. Trust is built when others know that your actions do not create chaos they must clean up. Trust is built when intervention stabilizes instead of escalates. Trust is built when power arrives with accountability attached. From this point on, the command axis tightens. Power does not activate on impulse. It activates on obligation. It does not move for ego. It moves for responsibility. It does not escalate for emotion. It intervenes only to the degree required and no more. And it always, without exception, accepts the burden that follows. This chapter completes the standard of reliability. Strength alone is meaningless. Discipline alone is incomplete. Power without consequence is dangerous. Power under burden is stabilizing. It creates order. It earns trust. It builds structures that last. As you move forward, this becomes non-negotiable. No responsibility, no action, no predefined stopping point, no action, no willingness to stand in front of the outcome, no action. These rules do not limit power. They purify it. They strip away ego, fear, and chaos, leaving only what matters. This is the kind of power that does not need to prove itself. It does not advertise. It does not threaten. It simply exists, ready, restrained, and reliable. And when it moves, it leaves stability behind instead of wreckage. Chapter 10. The Reliable, Dangerous Man. There is a lie that ends more disciplined lives than laziness ever could. The lie is that falling means you are broken, that one failure is proof that the system does not work, that one collapse means you were never disciplined in the first place. This belief is not just wrong, it is destructive. Falling is not an exception to the path. It is part of the mechanism. Anyone who believes stability means never falling has already misunderstood control. Stability is not the absence of impact. Stability is the ability to remain under command after impact. You will fall, not once, more than once, under pressure, under fatigue, under temptation, under circumstances you did not plan for. The fall is an event. It is not a state. Confusing the two is how people abandon structure and hand authority back to chaos. The disciplined system does not panic after a fall. It does not moralize. It does not ask what this says about your worth. It records the event and checks the command chain. The rules do not change because the ground was hit. They do not soften because pain appeared. They do not disappear because shame is loud. The rules remain. This is the first proof of reliability, not how clean the run was, but whether command survived contact. People who collapse after falling were never defeated by the fall itself. They were defeated by the decision to dismantle structure in the aftermath. Failure must be redefined at this level. Falling is not failure. Being down is not failure. Failure is staying down. Failure is lying still and calling it reflection. Failure is negotiating with discomfort and rewriting rules to feel better. When you fall, the correct response is procedural, not emotional. You return to the recovery protocol. You do not evaluate character. You do not seek meaning. You do not change the system. You stand up and re-enter structure. The moment you adjust rules in the aftermath, you teach the system that pain has authority, and pain, when given authority, will always choose avoidance. This is where the split becomes visible. Two voices appear immediately after a fall. One voice is emotional. It speaks fast. It suggests stopping, hiding, waiting, easing off. It argues that now is different, that rest is deserved, that the system was too harsh. The other voice is the rule. It does not argue. It does not explain. It issues instruction, continue, restore baseline, execute the next action. Only one of these voices is allowed to command. Emotion can be present. It can scream. It can hurt. It can protest, but it cannot decide. When emotion decides, discipline is over. When rules decide, recovery begins. This distinction is what separates controlled power from volatile strength. The dangerous man is not someone who never feels pain. He is someone whose pain never outranks the command chain. He does not need to silence emotion. He does not need to fight it. He simply refuses to give it authority. The rule leads. The dangerous part executes. This hierarchy does not collapse when things go wrong. It becomes more visible. Pain, when left unmanaged, turns into leakage. It spills into impulsive behavior, self-sabotage, outbursts, and quiet quitting. That is wasted energy. Pain has value only when it is routed through structure. Every crisis must activate the same three constraints: boundaries, repetition, consequence. Boundaries prevent escalation. Repetition maintains rhythm. Consequence keeps reality intact. No venting, no release behaviors, no exceptions. Pain is converted into execution. This is alchemy, not transformation through belief, but transformation through containment. The reliable, dangerous man does not chase relief. He uses pressure. He does not ask how to feel better. He asks what the rule requires, and he does it again. This is how power becomes predictable. This is how others begin to trust without being convinced. Trust does not come from speeches. It comes from pattern consistency under stress. When things break and behavior remains intact, reliability is established at this point. The final definition must be locked. Reliability is not kindness. Reliability is not humility. Reliability is not moral signaling. Reliability is capacity plus restraint plus structure. It is the ability to cause damage combined with the refusal to act without command. It is strength that does not need to prove itself. The unreliable man seeks validation through display. The reliable man does not move unless responsibility demands it. He does not posture. He does not announce. He does not perform. His presence is felt because his actions are consistent and limited by rule. There is a final test. It is not symbolic. It is operational. To pass. All conditions must be met. The capacity for harm exists. Without that, there is nothing to control. Action is never taken to impress. Without that, behavior becomes ego-driven. Activation occurs only when responsibility requires it. Without that, power becomes indulgence. Consequences are accepted before action is taken. Without that, control is an illusion. Miss one condition and the system fails. There are no partial passes. Reliability is binary. When this structure is complete, something subtle happens. Order forms around you without instruction. People trust your word without explanation. Your presence does not escalate chaos. It dampens it, not because you are harmless, but because you are controlled. You are not soft. You are not loud. You are stable. That stability is not personality. It is architecture. From here forward, the dangerous part of you is placed under command for life, not sometimes, not when convenient, with rules retain authority in every state: calm, pressure, success, failure, pain, fatigue. Nothing changes the hierarchy. This is identity, not behavior. Identity is what remains when emotion spikes and options narrow. Identity is what executes when excuses appear. Identity is what stands after the fall. This is the end of the promise and the beginning of permanence. You are not disciplined because you feel strong. You are disciplined because strength has been subordinated to structure. You are not reliable because you are kind. You are reliable because your behavior is predictable under load. You are dangerous not because you seek conflict, but because you could act decisively and choose not to unless required. Dangerous, disciplined, reliable. That is not a slogan. It is a closed system, and once it is closed, it does not need reinforcement. It runs it.